And here we go. Claire Isenthal. Super excited to talk to you today. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me,
We
Mitchell.
have, of course, I'll give a super quick intro for the listeners. So Claire is a best-selling author, but she spent a good amount of her professional life working at, there's the book right there, which we'll talk about. But she also spent a good portion of her professional life working at Google. And she had a pretty cushy job there that she decided to leave and chase her dream. So I love talking to people who love what they do. And there's a certain amount of energy that somebody just puts out into the world. And I think you're a perfect example of that. And I think when we start out, we have more time than we do opportunity. And at a certain point, that reverses and inverses. And so you have to be very particular with how you spend that time. So without further ado, how are we doing? Welcome, Claire.
Thank you. Thank you. It's fun to talk to you now because the book's been out for a month. So I feel like obviously it's a very timely convo. I left Google this past summer. So I'm starting to feel the aches of not getting a steady paycheck, but I'm starting to feel the excitement of having my creative work out in the world for a month. So I'm learning a lot. It's been a wild ride.
Yeah, I'll bet. And I want to talk about that. So when we both were living in Chicago years ago, I remember you invited me for a coffee or lunch at the Google office in Chicago, which was amazing. Like the office was dope. Like we walk in, there was all this food for lunch. Then you're like, want to go have a coffee? And we went to this awesome coffee shop inside the office. And one of the things that I've never forgotten is I was there for, I don't know, we're there for like an hour or two. And you had so many people just come up to you and be like, Claire, hey, what's up? Oh, how's this? And like, I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm walking around with a celebrity. When you think about your time at Google and just knowing you now for several years, you have awesome relationships with people. And so
Thanks, Mitchell.
are you aware of that? And or like, what do you think that is?
Oh, I do feel aware of that because I feel very fortunate to have that village and that network. And I really did see it come full circle when the book came out because people from all walks of my life were so supportive during that time. I don't think I really fully understood the extent of it until the book came out, until I saw those people show up for me in so many different ways. But I think the biggest thing about Google in particular and that lunch is that I've grown up with so many of those people, which was another reason why it was so hard to leave that job, was because some of my very close friends still work there or had worked there. I met them there. I learned so much from them there. And so I do think, though, circling back to your question, that fostering those friendships and those relationships are so important because you never know what bridge you're going to need to cross down the road. And I wouldn't be here if it weren't for those people. So
Totally. And you, of course, have had no expectation for people to share and whatnot. You've just like connected to them as human being to human being.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's like a big lesson for people that like you can't fake that, right?
Yeah,
Like those are real
you can't.
relationships that you've shown up for.
Yeah. And you have to show up for those people too. Like it has to be reciprocal, like we've kind of talked about. Like
Totally.
you really have to be there for those people too and in their lives and an active part of their lives. So
Right, totally. And so going back to the Google days, you didn't just have this idea, oh, maybe I'll write a book and then do that. Like this is something you've had in your head and in perhaps in your heart for a while. How did you make the decision? You had this awesome job at Google. Can you talk about your thought process as you're like, oh, should I go for this other thing? And what would that look like?
yeah, I'm happy to. I think it started a few years after I joined Google because in my mind, that had always been my dream job. I remember learning about Google in college and I remember working so hard to get there. And once I was finally there, I had this sudden realization and a panicky realization that, wow, maybe this isn't it. And this isn't fulfilling me like I thought it would. And so I had to go to therapy to really understand and identify like, what is it that's missing? Why is it that I all of a sudden can't shake this, I don't know, this gut instinct that like this isn't right. And so that's what finally opened the door for me to start really pursuing and considering writing, and knowing that that's what I'm meant to do and that's what I want to do, and that I have a story to tell, even though at that time I didn't know what that story was yet. It's not like I had the idea in my head before I was like, oh, I want to be a writer. It was just like, I just knew that I had to do it, and I had to share something with the world. And so, yeah.
So the order of operations was first recognizing that this thing you thought that you wanted, you're now inside there.
Yep.
And the recognition that, oh, maybe it's something else.
Yep.
And then talking to the therapist about like, I don't know what this is, but just maybe doesn't feel fully aligned.
Yep.
When did writing come up? Like, had you always been interested in writing?
I'd always been interested in writing. I'd always written, and I always loved reading. And I think in those conversations with my therapist, who was at Google at the time, it was a resource offered through Google, I finally admitted to myself, okay, this is what it is. This is what I want to do. I want to be a writer. And I felt very embarrassed of it almost. Like I felt like people would just scoff at that. And, not to equate this with coming out, but I felt like sharing that dream with people was such a vulnerable thing to do. And I was surprised by, once I did, how everyone really was so receptive to it and welcomed it with open arms. It was more in my own head. I was so concerned about what other people would think. I had so much self-criticism, like, oh, you're never going to be a writer. This is never going to work. And so once I put that aside, I was able to finally come forward and acknowledge it and admit to myself, like, this is what I really want to do. This is really my dream.
Nice. Yeah. Caring less about what other people think.
Yeah.
I always like the mantra of the people who matter don't mind, and the people who mind don't matter.
Yeah, exactly.
And so there's almost this concept of intellectual nudity that I wrote about recently, where it's just like there's something deeply attached to your identity, and it's weird to put that out into the universe, whether it's on the internet writing, or if it's just like to your friend group of like, this is a deep part of me, but like, here we go. It just feels right. And I don't know what people are going to think, but I can't not do this.
Yeah. And I still remember the conversations I had with some of my closest friends when I told them that this is what I wanted to do. And I think that I built it up so much in my own mind. And when I had the conversation, my friends were like, oh, that's awesome. Like, people were so supportive. And so I think there's this element to, like, along that intellectual nudity, how much of it is in our own head, and how much, how we make up some of these ideas in our own head about what other people are thinking of us, when really it's just us.
Right. Everyone just cares about themselves anyway.
Yeah.
They don't care.
No one's like sitting there thinking about me
people.
and caring about me and what I'm doing. Right. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think about this a lot too, where like, if we were to look at it career just logically and think like the first thing that we try, or the second thing or third thing, like there's so many things out there to do. Like, of course we should try a bunch of other things, but there's a lot of this identity or judgment or this like shoulding ourselves of, oh, I should go to school, get a degree, and I should get a good job, and I should do this and all that, versus like what just feels intrinsically right. And I think sometimes not having at least speaking for myself, I need to see somebody else do it and be like, oh, I didn't even know that was an option over here. And then like sometimes you combine like, oh, I like what this person did with this, but kind of more this style, and like you're blending almost your own personal monopoly. Yeah. Were there any people like that for you, where you're like, maybe this writing thing it's an author or just doing something on your own that sort of planted those early seeds?
Oh my gosh, that's such a good question. And I do think that's so true. We all have these paths that we walk because we think we should. But I would say there was a few people. One who I knew personally at Google, who was also in the process of becoming a life coach right around the same time that I was kind of having this identity crisis and like, oh my gosh, I want to write. I want to quit my job. That's all I want to do. And which I didn't, mind you. I didn't quit my job until at least probably 6 years later, maybe 5. So that's how long it took me to kind of get to a place where I was like, all right, I'm ready to take this leap. And so I think that's an important concept we can kind of talk about later, is making sure you kind of do this in a way that you feel supported and responsible when making some of these decisions. So it's not just like, oh, I just quit my job and, I'm going to make a bunch of money writing books, because that doesn't happen. But anyway, back to your question. This woman, it was a colleague of mine, and she was in the process of becoming a life coach. And so she kind of used me as a client, as a mock client at the time when she was going through a lot of training. And so we had a lot of conversations that just delved into what would life look like if I did pursue this, and what would my happiness look like if I did pursue this. And at the same time, I was also following another entrepreneur and life coach named Susie Moore. And this was just online and via her blog and her newsletter. And her mantra is about how to make a career out of your side hustle and make money off of your passion. So those were two influential people at the time of my life that really showed me like, okay, this can be done. But at the same time, it wasn't and still isn't common. Like you don't see really people doing this and taking this path. So that's why I think the conversation that we're having is very important, because, we're at the point where we're both, for those of you who don't know, Mitchell and I went to high school together. We're 34, 33, and we're kind of at this midpoint in our careers when I always thought that we'd have life really figured out by now when we're younger, and think about, oh, where am I going to be when I'm 33 or 34? And there's so much of life ahead, and there's so much we haven't figured out. And I wish that was talked about more.
Totally. There's this, I just tweeted out this morning, this dude, Jelly Roll, I think his name is, like a country musician. Last night at the CMAs, he won Best New Artist, and he's 39 years old. And so his acceptance speech was like, it was like you can't watch it and not get goosebumps. He's just like, yo, for anyone out there who like thinks they're late in the game, he said something like the windshield is a lot bigger than the rear view mirror for a reason. You like got to keep looking forward. And like he says it way better, obviously. And I think it's so true. It's like you look at our life, it's like we overestimate what we could do in, a decade, but underestimate what we could do in a year. Or maybe the opposite way. We underestimate what we can do in a decade, but overestimate what we can do in a year, because we're constantly like, oh, I got to do this, blah, 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 this and that. One of the things you said to me when I was the other week when we were talking about doing this, and I was asking you about how you felt when you finally made that decision to make the leap. Can you share how you felt?
Yeah. And I've been sharing this with people because I just think it's important to remind others, is when I finally made the decision to leave Google. So just like a little bit of context as well for people is that I have 2 young children at home. I was working a very demanding full-time job at Google while also trying to get the book ready for publication. And it was just too much for me to do. And so I knew at this point that in order for me to try to make this book a success and really devote my full-time energy to not only raising the kids, but also, of course, like trying to sell as many books as I can, I had to step away from Google, despite the cushy job, despite all the things that I did love about it. So when I finally made the decision to quit and I started writing again in a way that I hadn't before, I felt alive again. And I just think when I started talking to people about that, is like, I feel alive again. I think people think that you just have to go through the motions of life, and that's normal. It's just going through the motions, but that's not normal. It's not normal to just go through the motions of just being like, oh, meeting, calls, emails. Like, it's not. And so I haven't looked back. Like I've felt so happy with my decision. And of course, like I said, there's things I miss, like a steady paycheck, but I am so excited about all the possibilities that come with this,
Yeah, I love that so much. You're placing a bet on yourself, and by doing so, everyone's different, right? The people's situations are different, but you have accumulated enough, call it intellectual capital or social capital or skill sets, that you're willing to make that bet on yourself. And so it's a scary thing, but that's, if it was easy, then everyone would do it. And so
it's all the things. It's scary, exhilarating, exciting, scary again. So many unknowns. But it also feels like just the right thing to do, I'd imagine, right? Yes, it does. Like in my heart of hearts, it feels like the absolute right thing to do. And I can't imagine trying to do what I'm doing now while also trying to work. And like you said, I'm betting on myself, but I'm also investing in myself, and I'm not investing in a big corporate organization that really doesn't care about me. And I think I saw that also firsthand a lot. I saw, Google used to be such a big part of my identity, and, Google didn't care about me. And, people did there, and I cared about the people there, and the people were what made the magic of Google, but Google didn't, and big corporations don't care about you. And I think that's been proven the past few years, especially with the most recent tech layoffs.
Right, right. It's like we have to care about ourselves and to be a little bit more proactive there. I was inspired. So I really resonated with what you said about feeling alive. I have experienced that when I quit my corporate job in Chicago and then moved to Austin, and actively was not looking for any new job for a little bit over 2 months. And that feeling, it was just, I call this, it's like magical chapter of my life where I could do anything and just like have the space. There's this cognitive tax, I think, on us when we're constantly in between meetings or things on our calendar and emails and Zoom calls and Slacks. And so like to build that in there. And I guess for someone listening who's like, yeah, that sounds great, but also like I have bills to pay, I have a family, I have XYZ. What would your message? Well, I guess one thing I would recommend on my calendar right now.
Yeah.
I've always loved the idea of these mini retreats or this like the Bill Gates Think Weeks. But admittedly, I've always just been like, oh yeah, I'll do that one day or whatever. And so I'm taking one right now, granted a small one, but from yesterday to the end of the week into the weekend on my calendar, it says Feeling Alive mini retreat. And so it's just doing these things that I want to do. And I've had handful of calls in other interviews that I'm doing this week too. So to your point, there's ways to kind of build, sure, you could take the full leap and feel fully alive, but you tested it out a little bit, right? You were writing, you were talking to people at Google. How would you either advise your former self or advise another young writer or younger anyone who wants to go for their thing, but they're still figuring it out?
Oh, that's another great question. I would say when I was first testing out the waters and when I was really in the midst of writing the book in the first draft stages, I attended writers' conferences for the first time. And I can't recommend those enough. And that's, of course, specific to my field as an author and what I want to do. But I think that there's basically a conference of some kind for anyone now. And so to pursue that, because when it comes to writing, I was able to attend craft sessions and just like sessions. And I was also able to meet like-minded people who, other authors who were successful at the time, people in the publishing industry. I was really able to just feel, because writing is such an isolating task. And so to be around other writers who know what that experience was like was very validating. And that's also where I met my writing partners who became my critique group, which helped me and helped my writing evolve tremendously over years. So you just meet like-minded people who can kind of help you and start to serve as this bridge for what it is that you really want to do and pursue. And you start to see people who have been successful doing it. So you can envision that being you, and understand what path it is that you need to take to get there.
Yeah, I love the part about finding your people and potentially before, like as people are figuring this out. So you had mentioned Susie Moore. I hadn't heard of her, but I looked up and did a little reading on her before this. And she has this thing that I really like called the 100% rule. And she says, put simply, it's far too easy to waste our time, money, and energy by not committing wholeheartedly into an important life change. 99% is hard, 100% is easy. And I really like that because yes, we're all busy, but if you look at anybody who is exceptional at their craft, like it requires really hard work, right? And so if we're just like kind of half-assing, oh, maybe I'll do writing, oh, maybe I'll do this, maybe I'll do that, like you're not even really giving the full chance. And so with yours, it sounds like you're like, hey, I think it's writing, probably, maybe, but I'm just gonna, it's almost like you went to that 99% into 100 by going to the conferences, finding the people. Maybe it wasn't that. For other people, they'll do that and be like, oh, it's not that, but they'll find the next thing. But you found your people and your writing group, and that probably gave you more conviction behind, hey, this is actually feels really right for me.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's a way to test the waters and kind of see, like, are you ready to jump in? Is this something that I can do? while also teaching you something about what you love. And so I think it's a really good starting point for people. But to your point, it was after that I really had to start making sacrifices in order to write. And so at that point, I always make sure that this is very clear, because everyone's like, how did you write a book when you have two young kids? Because this stage of motherhood is extremely demanding and challenging. But I tell people I didn't have kids at the time. And that's not to say that you can't do something like this if you do. You just have to be more deliberate with your time. But what that looked like for me when I was at that life stage is that I wouldn't go out on weekends. I wouldn't go out during the day and day drink, with my friends or go to bars. I would come home right after work and I wouldn't turn on Bravo as much as I love Bravo and watch reality television, because I just felt kind of like once I stopped doing those things, I realized I didn't miss them. And so I think that's another big lesson is start cutting things out of your life and see what you miss. And if you do, indulge in it and don't feel guilty. But if you don't miss it, then there's your sign.
Right. We have this mantra at work: test then invest for anything that we do.
Yeah, test and invest, and you have to make the sacrifices. To your point, there's not shortcuts in this journey. There's not overnight success. Unless there's you're hit by a bolt of lightning, you work at it and you grind.
Right. And
in a good way, in a way that makes you excited and makes you feel alive because you're doing something for you.
Right.
But it is hard work.
Right. And if we're going to have the mindset that we're going to work hard at whatever we do, it might as well be something we enjoy and and can have that fulfillment from, rather than I just happen to work at a company that other people think is cool, but it's not really doing it for me.
Yeah. You're never going to regret that investment in yourself, I don't think. And that's another important lesson, is that no matter what that outcome is, you learned something and you invested in yourself, and you can always pivot. I can always go back to corporate America if I need to. I hope I don't need to, but I can.
Right. And so, knowing what you know now, is there any advice that you'd give your younger version self of, okay, you're going to be doing this book writing thing for the next 30 years or however much longer, any advice that you would either tell your older self would tell your current self, or your current self would tell your younger self to veer off into this new territory?
I would say that my advice would be, I thought that when I was writing the book, kind of my community and my network was going to be enough. And I realized, and it was because I had, to our conversation earlier, I had such a supportive, wonderful network. But in order to be successful, you have to tap into people and villages and other networks that are outside of your own. And I wish I would have done a better job of building that and fostering that before, because it wasn't until I launched the book that you realize, okay, you tap out of that network very quickly, and you need other people outside of that in order to be a success. In order for that success to spread, you need to reach more and more people. And so I wish I would have had the foresight to know that and do a better job of figuring out how to do that. And so it's my goal now to try to figure out how to help other debut authors do that prior to their works going live.
Right. And
or releasing into the world.
How might one do that? What do you plan to do for that?
Well, we had kind of talked about this, Mitchell, when we were, meeting about this, and you just had so many fantastic ideas. And I think that's another important note for people, is that the friends who you can bounce these ideas off of. And you said this to me, and I'll never forget this, is you can't read the ingredients when you're in the bottle. Is that what the label? You can't read the label when you're in the bottle. And so just even kind of talking to you, I wasn't even really giving you a problem, but you were able to kind of articulate some of the challenges I was experiencing and offer some really valuable insight. And I think that outside perspective is very important, and people need to have someone like that in their life that can kind of help them when they're stuck. So that's one thing. What was it? What was I even answering?
Just how you are now approaching, maybe connecting with other authors, or maybe connecting with people who have audiences or whoever.
Yes, that's okay. We'd kind of talked about doing a newsletter, and at first I was hesitant because I was like, people get a lot of emails, people are always reading things. That's another audience I have to reach and build. But I started realizing that there's all these platforms now that make it so easy, and that to share succinct, digestible information to other people who are going through something similar can do nothing but hopefully help others and then help myself. And so it's something that I want to try. I want to try to do a newsletter via like a Substack or a Medium. I've already kind of started it. I haven't launched it yet, but while all of these lessons are so fresh and while I'm in the midst, in the throes of learning all of this, I've been starting to journal and write it all down so that I can hopefully share with others and that others can learn from it too.
Amazing. Yeah, I think there's so many different things that you could do. Knowing you and knowing how much thought and effort that you put into everything that you do. Again, you could do a lot of these, but it's just like, testing out which one feels right and playing that long-term game that I think you and I are both playing.
Yeah.
The
definitely.
Last thing, but certainly not least, is can you talk to me about this book that is amazing to see your name and all these years of effort into a physical product?
I know. I can't believe it. I'm like, all of these years for this? No, it looks beautiful and it's great. Yeah, so my debut novel is The Rising Order. It is a thriller suspense novel that has alternating points of view between the main protagonist and the antagonist. But does the protagonist kind of become the antagonist? I don't know. You have to read to find out. It's definitely inspired by my years at Google and in big tech. And a young woman is taken hostage by a domestic terrorist organization who uses her to infiltrate her computing company. So it's definitely very different from the thrillers out there. I really channeled the kind of action and adventure aspect that I really loved in some of the young adult novels that I grew up obsessing over. And I channeled it into an adult novel and an adult take on the lead up to what a present day dystopian society would look like. So very timely, some pressing themes.
Yes. And people that I see on social media are freaking out about it. They're like sharing how much they'll read it in like a day or two. And just like, I know how much thought and detail you put into like each of the characters and is this right?
Yeah.
Is this wrong? And so it's so cool from my perspective to see this thing that you worked on. Now you're putting it into the world and people are loving it. So we'll like it.
It's been really cool to see. It's been my favorite part. It's been what's made all of this hard work so rewarding. But I think I knew in my heart that people were going to love it. I think I knew that, like there was something that was just telling me to do it and just keep going with it. And I'm glad I did.
Yeah. Yeah. And we'll link it in the show notes as well for everyone to check out. I guess last thing before we wrap, you put it out in the world, there's going to be a book 2. And hopefully by that point you'll still come on a show like this and talk about it. You won't big time me by that point.
Are you kidding?
It very well could be with this blowing up. Is there any message?
We're blowing up together.
Is there any message that you want to leave the listener with? Whether it's to pursue their thing or to test, whatever their passion is, or to find that thing. Anything you want to leave the listeners with?
I would say that I think it's easy to listen to conversations like this and think that both you and I are really confident in ourselves all the time. And I just want to reassure everyone that it is a daily/weekly battle where I have to make the decision to just keep going and to not get in my own way. And that, to your point, we underestimate what we can do. I, at the end of every year, always write down all of the big milestone moments that happen for me in the year. And I'm always in awe of all that does happen. And this time last year, I never could have foreseen that I'd be here. And so just keep going, and everybody deserves to feel alive and feel that magic that you talked about. And so search for it. A lot of people, I think, don't know what that is. Like when people have had conversations with me at Google before I was leaving, they're like, I don't have any hobbies. I don't know what you need. Just go explore the world and you'll find it. It's there. It's waiting for you. So go find it.
I love that so much. I got goosebumps when you said the feeling alive. Claire, thank you so much. Where can people find you? Your socials or website, or where do people find you?
Yes, you can find me at claireisenthal.com. My Instagram, my TikTok handles are all pretty much the same, Claire Isenthal. There's only one, so I don't think you'll find somebody else. But
there is only one, Claire Isenthal.
And
thank you so much.
I'll share my Substack whenever that's available. Hopefully soon.
Yes, I love it. I saw you actually already set it up, and so excited too.
You would. Yeah. I'm waiting for the logo and waiting for some other fun things that I'm working on before I set it live. But
amazing. Claire, thank you so much. Everyone check her out. Check out the book. And until next time.